Well, when I took over this ministry, obviously we knew the problem was on housing was uh, quite high in the priority of the people, especially the younger generation. Unfortunately, I presided a ministry which is seeing a huge growth, a huge, unbelievable increase in house prices across the nation. Um, Partly because supply is not catching up with demand, and partly because there's a huge migration between rural areas to the urban areas. 75% of Malaysians now living in urban areas. And thirdly, because the economy is booming, people have more money, they are more wealthy. So, fourthly, people now looking at buying housing as investment, which is sad, but you can't stop them. Those days, people invest in straight stock market, bonds and whatnot, gold, commodities. But now they're looking at the housing sector as an investment. Now, the problems arise involving the first-time buyers of houses, the youngsters like yang baru kahwin and all that. We have, if I'm not mistaken, nearly about 150,000 marriages a year in this country. So you can see, agak-agak lah, there's 150,000 couples, newlyweds out there, who are looking for houses, and that tremendous demand. I always believe that over time, the younger generation, they have to be contented with realities of life. Meaning to say, number one, they have to be contented with smaller apartments. Okay, they might have to be contented with renting instead of buying. There's nothing wrong with renting. I think that's an option that everybody should consider. Renting means you have that ability to move around. Since you're young, you probably change jobs quite often, right? So if you buy a house in Ampang, for example, say you move to Seremban, it's going to be tough for you to sell your house, and because it's not. But if you're renting, then you can make that decision quite fast. So that in itself is already an advantage. There needs to be some tweaking, and no way you can have a 1,500 square foot apartment in the middle of the city. That has to go. You're not going to get it at a affordable range. You may have to go a bit further to the suburbs and take public transportation together with it. Now, that is my opinion. I think the other thing is, of course, if you are buying a house, then you have to come up with a sizable amount of deposit, down payment. So a lot of people do not have that kind of money. So if they got 10,000-20,000 ringgit, they might not be able to buy a house. So my advice to them is go and invest that money somewhere, in stock market or whatever, and then be contented with renting, and until after you're a bit more financially stable, then you buy your own house. Now, there's another irony in this whole thing. If I'm not mistaken, 76%, 70%, but you can get that figure nanti, Jess. 70%, more than 70%, Malaysians own houses. Households. They own houses. I get that figure, but I know it's quite high, that range. Now, for those people who own houses already, they want the price to go up. They want their assets to appreciate. Only those young first-time buyers, but if you already own a house, in fact, those people young first-time buyer, the moment they bought a house, they have $1 million, they want that price to go up as fast as possible. So that is the irony of it. Okay, So when I came in, we decided to do something about this. Number one, and judging from what the Prime Minister wanted us to do, we want to take, all this while it's all about demand. Bank Negara naikkan LTE, loan to value, all these monetary policies. It's all curbing the demand side. But you can't do that for long. You have to tackle the supply side. That's why I'm very happy that the Prime Minister agreed to give me 2.3 billion ringgit actually this year for PPR, Project Perumahan Rakyat. This is the low cost housing. Well, not really low cost, it's low medium cost. Yeah. And to build about 16,500 units this year is a big challenge. And at the same time, the government, Prime Minister has given me 300 million for My Home. My Home is a program where we help the first-time buyers to buy affordable housing, and we help them up to 30,000 ringgit per person to be used for down payment, and that will help them to get their houses. That's 300 million. One, there's a stigma. That's why, starting I think a few years back, maybe a couple of years, 4 years back, the government decided that all PPR must not be seen as low-cost housing. If you go to the new PPRs now, they are better designed, better looking, good environment. I give you an example. Those days, for every 2 units of PPR, you have 1 parking space. So you have to fight. All right? 2 units, 1 parking space. So every day ada je gaduh, pagi-pagi siapa nak blocking apa semua kan. So now we made a decision that for every 1 unit, there is 1.5 parking. So if we got 1,000 units, there's 1,500 parkings there. Because we realize that even for poor family, they might have 2 cars, kancil and another kancil, So all PPRs now have 1.5 per every 1 unit of. On top of that, no more of PPR like those days. Now we must have at least we must have tadika, we must have shops, we must have surau, we must have dewan, we must have taman permainan, and a good landscaping. So basically, if you look at the PPR now, the facade of it is actually look like a decent condominium. A decent condominium. We also insist that it must be 3 bedrooms with 2 bathrooms, right? And if you go for higher, you must have lifts, lifts. And so these are the things. If you go to the new PPR sekarang ni, it's actually a living community. We go for lifestyle, albeit low end skate. Tapi we want to make sure. Good lighting. We don't want back alleys and whatnot. Almost all the PPR now, they're good design. The ones that we have, Ulu Selangor tu, is good. Seliau.
Where is it located?
Ulu Selangor. Bukit Jalil. Kepong, Sentul ada. All city centre. But those days, it's also the state government ni kena understand that sometimes they give us a piece of land which is, useless. For them, give this because it's for the poor people. But I argue with them, as I said just now, you give me this piece of land which is, say, 20 kilometers, 15 kilometers from the city centre. How are these people going to survive? So I'm very happy. For example, in the state of Sabah, they gave me a land smack down in the middle of the city, worth almost 30 million ringgit, just the land. And Johor is also doing so now. So back to your transit home ni, we have 2 towers now in Bukit Jalil, comprising I think 600 units 632 units. We are refurbishing those units now, because we want them a bit more. We want to give them more comfortable units. Kita painting, fix all the fixtures yang dah rosak apa semua. So we're doing that now, refurbishing those 2 units. We should be able to offer them by this year.
This year.
Yeah. And that is and transit homes are meant to be for those people who are on the, or, just to begin, but they must have jobs.
Okay.
So that we just want to give them that 2 years period to settle down. So if in 2 years' time you have to be out of that unit,
Okay.
And find your place, your own, so then new people can come in. There's not going to be permanent. So it's going to be a challenge to ask people to leave, but I'll be very, very worried if they don't understand the concept. That's why it's called transit anyway. And we set aside our kita punya policies that we set aside about 10%, if I'm not mistaken, of all the new PPR. I think 10%, yeah. For so every PPR now project must have 10% for transit homes, dedicated transit units. There are so many ideas. For example, one of the biggest problem is, of course, maintaining the place, right? They're poor, or they're low-income earners, so they really don't care about the environment. There are many ways to do this, and I'm playing, around with some of the ideas. For example, we got 1,000 units. Say you're closer to the city, then maybe we set aside 50 units for motels. Owned by the community there. So if you can sewakan on a daily basis or weekly basis. People come in, they don't want to stay in hotel, or if you have families coming over, those units you can sewakan for a few days. You can get a lot of money, and that money can be used for refurbishment of the units. There are, but it's private lands, and that's very expensive. The biggest component for any house construction is, of course, the land. Now I have this idea that we've been toying about in this. I suggested that we have 2 things. One is this ministry or the government must set aside some money, starting now, to buy land banks. Government, they must start buying. Now, people say, prices of houses in urban areas now are very expensive. Yes, but 10 years down the road, it will be, more expensive.
Yeah.
So, in a way that you don't lose that money. So, if say, for example, if government gives me 1 billion ringgit, I can start buying the land in urban areas, and build up the reserves, so that when we build houses, and if we don't build houses, you can use that for schools in the future, but primarily for affordable housing. And that's what we should do. I'm happy to note that Sarawak is trying to do that now. They're buying parcel of lands, and 1 billion ringgit you put buying land in city centres or urban areas. I think it's a good investment by the government. Now the problem is, every time I go and ask for land, the state government say, or PBT say, I don't have land anymore.
And that's idea gaining traction here.
I just mooted it about a month ago here, and I will probably be discussing with the Prime Minister. I mean, the amount is 1 billion. It sounds big, but even if you buy that 1 billion worth of land, that money will not go anywhere. It's there and it's growing. Land is growing by leaps and bounds, the prices. So you don't actually lose. The government will not lose money. Even if they allow us to borrow the money, I think they will be able to pay the interest. So that's what we should do. Otherwise, we end up buying private land anyway. And when you buy private land, then you will be subjected to ridiculous prices by the private sector. We have looked at it, but city center, it's relatively gone really. You know, I mean, even you talk about railway reserves, we've been plotting it actually. My Jabatan Perancang Badan, they just came out with a study looking at along the railway tracks, mana yang plot-plot yang kita boleh pakai. We've got that already, but to me that's not enough. That's not enough. Of course, the other thing that I'm looking at beside the land banks is also another bank, but now it's housing bank. I think it's about time the country have its own housing bank. I tell you the reason why. Because banks are quite reluctant to extend loans to people who are buying low-cost housing. Even when we say, look, for example, PPR, kita buat RM150,000, we're only selling them at RM35,000. RM35,000. That means government is subsidizing RM120,000.
Core financing and housing loan. Core financing can get a
That's right. That's right. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So the banks keep telling me it's not about the value of the house, it's that ability of that person to pay the monthly mortgage. And katalah kena lelong apa semua, it's messy dia kata nak handle. So we need a dedicated housing bank which will focus on housing industry. So they'll be more nimble, they know the industry, they can their expertise will be on housing. So it is something that I'm thinking of. I'm not saying that the banks right now, the commercial banks that we have now, are not able to extend loan ataupun tak boleh helping the housing industry, but a dedicated housing bank would probably be a better option. So we got land banks and housing bank. So those are the two things that we are looking at the moment as far as housing is concerned. Of course, the government now, beside PPR, we have My Home tadi.
Okay.
We've got also Project Perumahan Penjawat Awam 1 Malaysia, PPA 1M. Now, this one is also another policy by the government to tackle the supply side. PPA 1M ni, Perumahan Penjawat Awam 1 Malaysia, is dedicated for civil servant, federal, state and local authorities. The government, if the location is right and there's demand from the civil servants, then what we will do is we will subsidize, give them grants up to 25% of their cost of building those houses. So that there are a few hundred millions there. That the fund is being managed by UCAS, but anything outside of Wilayah Persekutuan, KPKT is handling the mobilization, the planning and all that. And then of course we have Prima and SPNB. So everybody is like, building houses. My only concern is this, practical problems. When everybody start building houses, obviously we are limited by the industries itself. For example, how much cement can we produce? How many more labor that we need? How many more? And those are the issues, practical issues that we need to address as well. Steel, Of course, then comes this problem of traffic jam lah, macam-macam. Social problems and whatnot. So those are the issues that we need to look at also.